here and there. We do live streaming our events as well, so if there's something you can't make it to the event for, you can check us out on our Politics and Prose YouTube channel. We also have supported events, partnered events, some larger ones at like GW and Sidwell and other venues. We also have our classes and trips, so go ahead and check out our website, politics-prose.com, for a full list of everything that we have. Before we get going, I want to ask you all to take out your phones and turn it on silent so as not to disrupt the event. And when we get to the audience Q&A portion, there's a mic right here next to this pillar. Some of you can't see the mic, but trust, it's right here next to the pillar. So please come up and speak clearly into the microphone for the audience Q&A. And then when we get to the signing, that's going to take place right here. The signing line is going to start at the same pillar. We have plenty of books available at the registers, so just go back to the registers and we have copies available. Once the event is complete, if you can please fold up your chairs and lean them against something sturdy, that'd be fantastic. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Andrew Yang and Stephen Marche to talk about their new novel, The Last Election. It's a unique political thriller about an outlandish yet frighteningly possible, even probable scenario in America's near future. During this crucial 2024 presidential election, though it is fiction, it is a wake-up call to a country tearing itself apart. Andrew Yang is the co-founder of the Forward Party, a new independent political movement dedicated to restoring the promise of American democracy. He was a Democratic presidential candidate in 2020 whose campaign outlasted over a dozen mainstream political office holders and raised $40 million from hundreds of thousands of everyday Americans, dubbed the Yang Gang. His New York Times best-selling book, The War on Normal People, helped introduce the idea of universal basic income into the political mainstream, and his most recent book, Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy, became a national bestseller. Named by President Obama as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship, he is a founder of the Humanity Forward and Venture for America. He lives with his family in New York. Co-author Stephen Marche is a novelist and essayist. He is the author of a dozen books, including The Next Civil War, The Unmade Bed, The Messy Truth About Men and Women in the 21st Century, and The Hunger of the Wolf. He has written opinion pieces and essays for The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Atlantic, Esquire, and many others. They will be joined tonight in conversation with Jon Ward, a senior political correspondent for Yahoo News, author of Testimony and Camelot's End. He is the host of the Long Game podcast. Jon has covered American politics and culture for 2 decades as a city desk reporter here in D.C., as a White House correspondent who traveled aboard Air Force One, and as a national affairs correspondent. He's been published in the Washington Post, The New Republic, Political Magazine, among many others. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Andrew Yang, Stephen Marche, and Jon Ward.
Everybody can hear me okay? Thank you all for coming. Great turnout. And I wanted to just start by throwing over to Andrew and just asking you, Andrew, to talk about basically why you wrote this book, give a little bit of background for the outlines, the sketch of what it's about, but I'm curious why you wrote it.
Sure thing. I've read both of these guys' books, by the way. You should definitely check them out. So I came off the presidential trail in 2020 having overachieved objectively. Thank you to those of you who supported my campaign. But I still felt despondent about the future of American politics. It wasn't like a, yay, things are going to be great situation. It was like, oh, no, like I feel kind of worse than ever, despite the fact that I thought I'd put my best effort out there. And so I sat down to figure out the struggles that we're having and determined that a lot of it is that we have this kind of creaking, decaying political system that is stuck in whichever century you want, either 19th or 20th, and while a lot of other things are changing. And one of the things that folks said to me when I was running for president, my campaign operatives, if you ever run for president, they'll tell you this too. They'd whisper bio before I hit the stage. And what they were saying was talk about your biography, because people understand stories better than they understand facts and statistics. Unfortunately for everyone, I think and talk in facts and statistics. And so my campaign operatives tried to beat that out of me, and were just like, no, talk about your upbringing, talk about being the son of immigrants, talk about all this stuff. And they were generally correct. Where human beings tend to operate in narratives, in stories, in characters, those tendencies, by the way, threaten to destroy us. I mean, that's the truth of it. But if you're trying to get a set of messages out or a vision out to the world, stories are indispensable. They're vital. So I thought, okay, how can I convey the concerns about the American democratic system in story form? And for this, I enlisted my friend Stephen Marche, because though I've written 3 nonfiction books, I have never written a novel, and I didn't intend to start with this one. So I said, you know what? I need a writing partner who's an experienced novelist.
Yeah. I mean, Andrew came to me and, I'd written a book called The Next Civil War, which was also, I mean, I think we talked about that a lot on your podcast and things like that, which was sort of an analysis of the structural crisis in American politics and the American, but I never wrote a chapter in there about electoral politics because I couldn't really triangulate the truth. I couldn't really figure out what was going on. You just get so many different answers from so many different people, and everyone has an agenda. And so basically, Andrew told me the truth about how American politics works. And, I said, that's the condition. Like, well, you tell me the truth. You can cut whatever you want at the end. He didn't cut anything at the end. So I got the actual scuttlebutt on how American politics works. And, I did write a book called The Next Civil War, so I thought I was pretty used to pessimism. But, with like 10 minutes conversation with you and Zach and your other guys and other operatives, it was like, oh, it's so much worse than I thought. It's like it's way worse than I thought. So, and then we worked together to flesh out a plot and to flesh out the basic ideas of what it would look like, and of course, the details that took forever. That took like a long series of conversations between us, and that was how we wrote it.
So there's a couple thematic things in this book that I thought were interesting. I'm curious how many people have read it here tonight. I guess it
comes out tomorrow.
Hard to get, so I've read it.
You guys are thieves, intellectual property pirates, stealing from hard-working author. No, I'm kidding.
But there is this element in the book where it is so situated in a mindset that has bypassed sort of the old institutions, media being one of them. There's a line in the book where it says, everybody is pretending to live in an America they can remember. And I thought that was a really interesting line. The characters in this book have moved past the America most of us remember. But can you all talk about that line and what you're trying to bring across in that statement?
When I think that line, I think about our media landscape. And I'm old enough to remember when there were 3 TV networks, and it was Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, and Peter Jennings, and whichever one of them you liked would tell you pretty much the same thing as what the other person told you. Now, fast forward to today, when I ran for president, I came up through podcasts, because it turns out that there's now this entire panoply or landscape of folks who have their own platforms, and some of them you might not like at all, some of them you're fine with. But they have, by the numbers, in many cases, a much more significant reach and audience than MSNBC or CNN, which I also spend time on, because you got to do it all. But we essentially are pretending we're operating in a media landscape of 15 years ago where everyone turned on the TV and that's what they got. I will say, too, the average age of a CNN viewer is 58. The average age of a Fox viewer is 65. the average age of an MSNBC viewer is a little bit between them. It's like 62, 63. So for the young people here, that's probably not you. And so for you, you're getting it via TikTok and Comedy Central and a few things that get translated on your social media feed. And that's actually more common by the numbers, but we operate as if it's still the media landscape of the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, there's a character in the book named, let me make sure I get it right, Andy Pons,
Yeah.
who I think is based on Tim Pool.
Who knows?
Well, I'll say it. I think he's
Right.
based on Tim Pool, who's a YouTuber who has, 1.3 million
I've been on
subscribers. Have you really?
Yeah.
But there are, if anybody knows this world, there are, many of these people with millions of subscribers on YouTube. And that's not even to mention people like Joe Rogan, who's the most influential podcaster, I think, out there right now. And I just thought that was a really interesting. I think you'll enjoy that part of the book. Did you want to say something about that?
Well, I mean, Andrew sort of told me the truth about how American politics works. Yeah. And I was very grateful for that. And I wanted, the other sort of half of this story, or maybe it's just a third, is the media side, which I know, right? Like I've worked for The Atlantic and The Times and all these places and so on. And I wanted to do a kind of real portrait of that, like how that actually looks and who those, and I think one thing we both wanted in this book is like, these are not bad people. Kind of, there's a couple of villains, but the truth is no one's really a bad guy. Or in the case of Mary, like she's just faced with bad choices, right? Like the problems here are between bad choices and worse choices, and that's the moral order they fit. So your original line about like they want to live in the America they remember, like that. Both of these groups, the media and the politicians, are both facing choices that are not ideal and trying to deal in that world, rather than, what is the right thing to do.
Yeah. The easy narrative is, hey, these are bad people, and if we could just replace them with good people, we'd be all set. That's not the situation we're in. To quote Ezra Klein, corruptive systems compromise good individuals with ease. So the real dangerous landscape is if you manage to get a good person into that anchor seat or that elected office, they're not actually going to be able to change a whole heck of a lot because they're captive to the same incentives and mechanics and chase for ratings or whatnot as the next person. That's actually a much more accurate reality that reflects the depth of the challenges that we're facing.
We should have made that line the epigraph to the book. We should have put that right at the front. The Ezra Klein line you just said. Corruptive systems, because that's what the book is about. Exactly. Corruptive systems.
Then we'd owe Ezra royalties.
Yeah, right.
Ezra gets enough.
Yeah, he gets enough, no doubt.
There's two other elements of an America many of us remember that I'm thinking of right now, apart from media. One is sort of economics, the ability to do better than your parents or build on your parents, right? And I think that's something that the book is responding to that's slipping away from a lot of people, and that's frustrating to a lot of people. I think the third category of things in America that a lot of us remember and would like to maintain is a peaceful transfer of power through a presidential election. Talk about what this book is trying to raise awareness about when it comes to electoral politics, presidential elections, transfer of power.
I would define the American dream as thinking our kids are going to do better than we did. And there are a lot of Americans who legitimately do not think that our kids are going to do better than we did. I'm a parent. I look at my kids and it's like, geez, like, what kind of country are we going to leave you? And in that environment, then, this becomes this anger and frustration that has a hard time finding productive expression. So it winds up getting expressed very, very unproductively. I mean, at the extreme end, it can be expressed with violence or hate. But there's this anti-institutional energy that keeps growing and growing in American life. I think it's what animates today's Republican Party, honestly, that there used to be, it's like, hey, we have two different versions of institutions and establishments with different emphases, and now it's like, throw the bums out, burn it all down, don't believe anything, they're all full of it. And that energy actually becomes very, very difficult to counter in an environment where people don't think their kids are going to do better than them. You know what I mean? At that point, you look up and say, "Oh shoot! Like, you know, maybe this person's talking sense because, like, I'm bummed about my kid's future." When I was running for president, I would say to folks, "Look, what are the staples of American life? Housing, healthcare, education. By the numbers, because I'm a math guy, and this is the way I think. It's like that. You know, they've gotten between 1 and 400% more expensive since the 90s." Have your incomes gone up 1 to 400% in that time? No, they have not. Certainly not in Iowa or New Hampshire, the places I was talking about. So then you wind up with this anger that wants to express itself through the political system, but there are very, very few good ways for it to express itself. So one of the ways it is expressing itself now is in presidential politics. And I would argue that Donald Trump is a manifestation of that. And this book is, in many ways, a warning about not taking for granted the things you might take for granted in terms of peaceful transfer of power, having an election that really feels like an election, because there are things that are around the corner in American life that aren't going to feel like elections as we know them.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we wrote this book is ultimately to give a sort of ring the alarm bell of what that would look like, right? Of what a constitutional transfer of power might look like, which would not be defined as a legitimate democratic election by anyone. And I think one of the things that's also a little different about this sort of political literary collaboration is, like, you know, our candidate, our hero, if you will, or like the president, you know, he's a billionaire, because like the reality is that a billionaire would need to do this to jump levels, right?
One of the jokes I had was I would get introduced as California tech billionaire Andrew Yang, and then my wife would be like, "Where the heck is this $1 billion they keep talking about? You know, like, why am I driving a Subaru?"
I thought you were too. I was disappointed.
I'm disappointing to many people that way.
But I remember, like, one of the first.
But
things
it's because of this thought that in order to genuinely change the system, you need to be a billionaire.
Well, you know, I mean, one of the first conversations we had that I remember, we have something here, like, this is going to be a little different, is like, you know, I was like, okay, so what are the most important days in a presidential campaign? And your answer was first quarterly fundraising report, second quarterly fundraising report, third quarterly fundraising report. And I was like, okay, right? Because, like, even the parodies and the satires that you see about American politics, like Veep or whatever, they don't really get the how financial it is, right? Like how structured in money it is. And so that was like, then when we had that conversation, I was like, okay, this book will be different. Like we will get something out of this book that's not, you know, because it's not the kind of book where it's like, well, we'll just have a hero who rises from nothing and like storms, and like, because that's not realistic. We want to actually provide an accurate portrayal of what this looks like.
We're in the post-hero
yeah
stage of American
well, no, they're
politics.
heroes, but they have bad choices, you know, bad options, really.
I texted Andrew after I finished reading the book, and I said, this book, every sale of this book should come with a complimentary bottle of Tums. Because it just brought back the heartburn that I experienced after the 2020 election and the anxiety of watching.
You mean 2016 or 2020? Or
2020.
2020.
After, well, sure, yes to both. But, you know, after the just watching the run up to January 6th. So can you guys, you know, this book is a sobering, grim read. What is your case for optimism or hopefulness?
So when I was running for president, I was talking about AI and various things that actually had some very dark repercussions if you played them out. And I was pretty direct about it. I was in Iowa, be like, hey guys, we did a number on your farms and those jobs. We did a number on your factories and manufacturing jobs. Guess what? We're going to come for your stores and your trucking jobs in a minute. So let's get with the program. We need 40,000 of you to stop the wave that's coming. We got 10,000, so, you know, bully for us. I won the Iowa youth poll, so if it had only been 18-year-olds, you know, I might have won. Anyway. So
the case for optimism is limit voting to 25 and 18.
Really. So I was presenting a relatively, I thought, a realistic case, and it was somewhat dark, but I did it in a way that was still optimistic in the sense like we can do something about it. Like, it is up to us. The future is in our hands. Let's go do the thing. And this is a grim picture in the novel, but I wake up every day trying to do something about it. And one of the what's been motivating me for the last 6 years was I was at a conference, and a person said on stage, "Why does it feel like we're on a ride to a place we don't want to go, but none of us can do anything about it?" How many of you actually have felt that at some point in the last number of years? A lot of us have felt that way, and I am an optimist, and I'm like, look, if enough of us get our acts together, is there a reason why we all have to careen off the abyss together? I mean, that's ridiculous. We are the most modern, wealthy, powerful society in the history of the world. There are actually many, many awesome, excellent, good-natured people here. I'm guessing some of you are in that number. I mean, you seem awesome to me. And so why can we not get our acts together enough so that we don't wind up with a terrible result, terrible outcome, terrible process? I'm going to just put a face on, some people will not like it, whatever. I think it is patently ridiculous that we could wind up with a Biden-Trump rematch in 2024. In a country of 330 million people, these strike anyone as the best choices. That's the product of an irrational system. And so we should modernize it. We should rationalize. Instead of being like, it's always been this way. One, it has not always been this way. Two, the founders never intended this. If they woke up today, they'd be like, you guys are doing what? You know what I mean?
That is true.
Oh, it's true. There's not a word about the Democrats or Republicans in the Constitution. They would have hated it. George Washington was saying, whatever you guys do, don't do that. John Adams, 2 great parties would be an evil across the land. You just look up these quotes and be like, wow. So we're essentially, we have emblazoned their worst nightmare into reality and then pretended we can't change it. It's the dumbest thing in the world, and so we're just gonna ride it into the anyway. So when you talk about pessimism, optimism, I think you have to be a pretty optimistic guy to think we can do something about it. But I also think that is the only choice you can make, because other than that, it's like, oh well, I guess we're just gonna do this and and all be upset. I mean, let's do something about it, people.
But I think the question is what, right? The question is what? And I think when you were talking earlier, you mentioned how you can swap out the individual actors. That doesn't change a lot. There's the famous saying, think globally, act locally, right? I think, a turn on that is think structurally.
No, dude, I'm with you.
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
I'm sorry to digress a little bit. How much does it cost to fix American democracy? $200 million. Where am I getting that number? You run a ballot initiative in 10 states to get rid of the primaries at $20 million apiece. You succeed in 4 states. You liberate 8 U.S. senators who now don't have party primaries and can do the right thing, as opposed to what their 10 to 12% of the most polarized base voters want them to do. That would actually dramatically improve American politics.
Can you repeat that? Because I think that was a lot of information really fast. Go over that again.
All right, check it out. What is the approval rating for U.S. Congress as we're here together tonight? 20%, that's right. What is the re-election rate for incumbent members of Congress? 94%. That's right. A better win rate than the Jordan-era Chicago Bulls. Now, why is that gulf so dramatic? It's because 90% of the districts are drawn not to be competitive. They're either blue or red. The greatest myth and fiction in American life is that our leaders have to make 51% of us happy in order to stay in office. Not true at all. What they have to do is keep the most extreme 10 to 12% of base voters placated and off their back, and then they coast in the general, because 90% of them are uncompetitive in the general. So that's why we feel so polarized, because they're not listening to 51% of us. They're listening to the 10 to 12% on the wings that control the base of each party. So how do you get out of this? You make it so that the fiction becomes reality, and they have to make 51% of us happy by getting rid of the party primaries at the state level. It's one of the only vulnerabilities in the system. And for those of you who think, wow, that's crazy or impossible, 3 states have already done it. Maine, Alaska, and then Nevada voted it in. And when Alaska voted to do it, you saw immediate results, because how many of you have heard of Mary Peltola? How many of you have heard of Sarah Palin? Mary Peltola is the person who beat Sarah Palin in the congressional race. And you know why she did it? Because there were no party primaries anymore in Alaska, and there was via ranked choice voting, and then Mary Peltola eked it out. Also, as significantly, Lisa Murkowski fended off a Trump-endorsed challenger named Kelly Shabaka. Even though Lisa Murkowski voted to impeach Trump, her popularity among Alaskan Republicans went down to 8%. So how the heck does she get back? There's no Republican primary anymore. So she just showed up and it's like, hey guys, I'm in the general. Do enough of you actually believe that I did the right thing? And then she won by 5 points. So it wasn't a landslide, but she completely loses. How many of you think that $6 million to get rid of the party primaries, Palin out, Murkowski back in, was a great investment? Right? So then we do that in 10 other states. Now, Alaska's a cheaper state than normal. Politics and Prose could be on Alaskan TV tomorrow if it felt like it, for no reason at all. But you go to other places, it's more like 20 million. But we're going to spend $8 billion beating each other up in the next cycle. You know, what's an appropriate amount to spend to fix the underlying system? So this is Andrew Yang's day job, is going to people saying, look, guys, like, we can yell about it, we can scream about it, but unless we change the underlying structures, the incentives that are tearing us apart, we're not going to get anywhere. So join with me in doing that, and that's what the Forward Party is. Now, the Forward Party, Jon Ward accepted, the Forward Party does not get represented in the press as anything I just described. In the mainstream press, it's Ralph Nader, like Spoiler, Jill Stein, Andrew Yang. We're not touching the presidential. We are making inroads at the state level where all of this stuff is codified anyway to get our way out of this mess. If that sounds good to you, check out forwardparty.com and let's build our way out, because they're not going to do it. This town's not going to do it. We're going to have to do it.
Stephen?
It is great doing a book tour with an incredibly charismatic speaker. Like I just have nothing. Well, all I would say is, I don't know pessimism or optimism, but there's no cynicism here, you know, and that's what I like. Because I find the optimism to be cynical. Right, like to say that things are all going to work out, like that's in the interest of, like, you know, a lot of the stuff we talked about in the book are like these structural incentives of the of the two parties that are reinforcing that they will never break, because it literally pays for all their kids to go to university, and and those kind of structural things are really ripping the country apart, but what nurtures them is actually a kind of sick optimism, I find. Do you know what I mean?
No, it's like this. So what it reminds me of is this Upton Sinclair quote: "It's very difficult to persuade a man of something if his living depends upon him believing it, or believing the opposite." Like that is it, really. Is like you said, there are a lot of people who have this kind of fake optimism, what I called in my last book, Forward, constructive institutionalism, where it's like, it's okay, it's going to work out, even though there's actually tons of evidence to the contrary. And one of the fields I actually like put this on, and this not like I despair that we have had over 2,000 local newspapers go out of business in America. And by the way, that's polarizing, because they tended to be pretty up the middle and just report on local things. And so when that newspaper dies, you know what takes over? The Facebook feed and YouTube and, like, you know, some things that are much more ideological and overly dramatic. And I run around saying to myself, it's like, why the heck haven't the journalists just gone up in arms and been like, hey guys, guess what? Democracy is going to die because you just fired 30,000 of us, you know? And that would be real. But instead there's this fake optimism. It's like, journalism will be all right. Like, everything will be all right. You know, you can get rid of 30,000 of us, a couple thousand papers. You know, I mean, like that has, you know, like that. There's no, that there's no combat. There's no urgency. That there's no honesty about it, really, because we've been conditioned to say, look, in order to continue to make a living in this environment, you can't blame the system. You've got to play ball within the system. So play ball, and then everyone's like, okay, I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm gonna play ball. Even though, like you said, like the
game is rotten.
Yeah, the game is rotten.
Yeah.
But the players will just be like, I'm going to play the game until my dying breath.
Yeah.
A lot of different directions we could go. I do think it's interesting, Andrew, that you are a magnetic figure, a charismatic personality. You're talking about the need for all of us to do our part. One of the temptations of
do your part by buying this book. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm kidding.
No, but one of the temptations of, like, celebrity, the idea of celebrity is that we just become entranced and we expect you to solve our problems. And one of the themes of what we're talking about is that we all have to pitch in and do our part. And I think a lot of that comes from acting locally, which is why I think the Forward Party is doing something positive. Before we go to questions here, we're going to do that after this question. I wanted to get to one more thing here. I want to talk about who I think is the real villain of the book, who's a billionaire, futurist technology engineer, loosely based, in my opinion, on Peter Thiel. I guess you
none
could
of
throw
these
in.
people. This is all
You
fiction.
Sure. This isn't you saying this.
You're right, okay.
This is me saying this. That this is my guess
Yeah.
as to who it's based on. It seems to be based on Peter Thiel, maybe Elon Musk. I wanted to read a quote. Great quote. This is by this character. The engineers are the real power now, as is our right, as is our destiny. Everyone talks about conspiracies. You know what the real conspiracy is? Democracy. Democracy means mediocrity. Sheep built democracy out of fear of talent, fear of the builders. We have a real chance this election to end the administrative state so that we may live by what we will for ourselves. Do you guys think that people like this are the real threat to American democracy?
You better answer that one.
There are real life human beings who have expressed that sentiment to me.
For sure,
sure.
They are real.
And some of them are highly, highly resourced and willing to spend those resources in various ways, and some of them are very effective. They're a real force. That it's something that I like about the book is that we kind of presented that figure in their full intellectual powers, where it's like you read it and you're like, well, I don't know if I agree with where that goes, but there's a real pillar of business leaders that either publicly or privately would totally agree with those sentiments.
Yeah, I love the part about René Girard, the French philosopher. I actually had a Republican data person at one point text me. I asked them a question about, what's going on, and they just texted me back, read René Girard.
Yeah, if someone mentions René Girard, that should be like a little light go off in your head. Like, okay, what? Not that that's bad. Not that there's anything wrong with René Girard, as a matter of fact. But like, it's like, okay, well, what are we gonna think here?
It's dark.
I read Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged as a kid, and I liked them at the time, but I was quite young.
All right, we're going to go to questions from the audience. If somebody from Politics and Prose wants to remind me how to do this.
There's a microphone
right there.
Please line up in the microphone.
Okay, and please try to keep the questions short and have a question mark at the end.
Are you running for president again, and under which party? And does whether a person believe in conspiracy theories and which ones determine what party they're under?
I think that question's for me.
I have no plans to run for president. In fact, I'm not an American citizen, so.
So my stock response now to whether I'm going to run for president is apparently I have 40 more years. Right now, I'm convinced that we have to change the structures and the incentives, and I'm looking for the most effective way to make that case. I don't think that running for president in 2024 would be a productive way to make that case, and so I've all but ruled it out. I guess, does that answer the question? The conspiracy theory elements, oh man. Like, I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post last year about boys and men struggling, and I think that one of the byproducts of isolation and struggle is people going down internet-fueled rabbit holes, including various conspiracy theories, and it's in many. I mean, it's trillion-dollar companies preying on millions of people. So I would lead with empathy when it comes to folks who believe conspiracy theories, and the key thing is that if you want someone to stop believing in conspiracy theories, you have to give them something else that they can believe in, or else they will take what they're given and go down directions that we'd rather they not.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Klaus Schwab's method of letting AI follow the trends and pick the president, and where Klaus Schwab is in charge regardless?
Well, if the AI were to select certain... No, I'm kidding. No, I think the job is truly to try and make our democracy more genuinely representative and future-proof. And that's going to require a vote of confidence in the American people. And I think that we have a very limited set of choices ahead of us. It's either restore the system so that it believes in us and then give us what we want, or something very AI and inhuman, truly, and authoritarian. I mean, when someone asked me what I thought was going to happen in America, without thinking, I said, we're going to slump our way into authoritarianism. And I still think, unfortunately, that's the most likely scenario.
Okay. In the event we don't slump into authoritarianism, and as we see that, despite the fact that we are heading towards this scenario of having two wildly unpopular front-runner candidates, how can we make it so that whatever candidate, or how do we encourage there to be that thing that you talked about, universal basic income, in the case of AI taking over all of our jobs? Because after all, as AI tends to automate various industry and industry after industry, what can be done?
So when I was running for president, universal basic income had an approval rating of 27%. So I was making kind of an esoteric case. By the time my campaign ended, it was up to 65%. So I think we had something to do with that. And so when I was young and naive in 2019 or so, I might have thought that if 65% of us want something, maybe we'd get it. I now believe that what we want has very little to do with what we get. 74% of us want term limits. Are we going to get that? 85% of us want money out of politics. Are we going to get that? And so the question is, how do you actually reconnect policy to what folks want? And then if you can rebuild that connection, then you have a chance to alleviate poverty, have universal basic income, have a chance of passage. One of the things I'm proudest of and also most upset about is that in the pandemic, we implemented an enhanced child tax credit that lifted several million American kids out of poverty. 130 economists said it's the best thing we've done in a generation. I did lobby furiously for that. I had hundreds of conversations here on Capitol Hill, so I felt a measure of pride. Also spent the equivalent of millions of dollars trying to lobby for it. And then it got discontinued in the beginning of 22, and that broke my heart and infuriated me. And I waited to see what the outcry would be, and there was none. Because it turns out if you kick 3 million kids and families back into poverty, they're too busy trying to make ends meet to come out and protest and show up in members of Congress office and the rest of it. So that was a lesson for me, that if we want something like the alleviation of poverty, we're going to have to change our political system first.
Would that also be the case for if we would like something such as transferring our defense budget more and allocating it more sparsely to improve rail infrastructure, improve the quality of life for individuals
What
with
a specific
disabilities?
question.
This is quite an audience.
Sorry, it's just...
No. I mean, I enjoyed it. I think, we spend whatever, $700 billion on military defense. There are other ways that you could imagine $700 billion being channeled quite effectively. So here are the rough numbers. Our economy now is $25 trillion. There are 30 million of us or so. So that's about 80,000 a head. Now, if you imagine an economy producing 80,000 a head, what do you think is a reasonable floor we could set for folks? I suggested 12,000 when I was running. Just be like, look, we're just going to give you $1,000 a month. I'm going to suggest an $80,000 like per person environment. That seems pretty reasonable. And then you can start making other commitments. One of the great problems we have, and there's a woman named Jen Polka I've spent some time with. So here's one of the problems in American life. There are a bunch, but one is we say we want something. Let's call it education, public safety, whatever it is. And then we spend a certain amount of money on it, and then it doesn't work. And then we say, hey, why isn't it working? And then what they'll say is like, oh, we needed more money. And then we'll be like, okay, all right. And then sometimes they even get more money. And then after they get more money, does it start working? No. And then they'll be like, the problem is we needed more money or less money. It's like, or, it's like you can move money back and forth. But so I'm using this as like an example with the military. It's like, what is the appropriate amount to spend on our military? I'm someone who believes that we should have a military and it should be very, very, very awesome. But do we have confidence that the money we're spending right now is actually making us safer or doing things? It's like some things we're probably doing too much and some things we're probably doing too little. But like, what is the right spend? And that's something that has become a political question and not an empirical question.
All right, sir, you've had 2 questions. There's 5 other folks that want to ask a question. Thank you, though.
Hi, what did you learn from running for mayor of New York a couple of years ago, and what would you do differently if you could do it again?
So running for mayor was the opposite of running for president for me. Because running for president, I was trying to stay a step ahead of oblivion because I was going to wink out of existence as soon as I missed a debate. And so my team was like, okay, guys, let's get energy. Let's do things. The running for mayor was the opposite, where I was the front runner immediately. And so I told my wife one night, it was like, I feel like I'm a whale getting harpooned every day. And my job is just to try and make it out to sea before the harpoons get me. And so it was like the opposite dynamic, because for other candidates, it's like, well, shoot, like, the thing to do is to, like, throw a harpoon today. Throw a harpoon. And so, if I could do it again, I certainly would campaign differently and operate less like the whale and more like someone who wanted to solve people's problems and had very direct plans to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try this. If our main problem is kind of a nameless, or it has a name, it's like perverse incentives. But if it's if it's a faceless problem, and it's kind of a subtle one, do you think it's possible to redirect people's attention to the less sexy villain? Because a lot of us are encouraged to have ill will towards, people that we can point to, whether it's, the left guy or the right guy, and we direct all attention there, and we're encouraged to by media with their own incentives. So.
Dude, I love this question so much. He's right.
That's the nub of the problem.
That's the nub of the problem. And it's much easier to get people ginned up about a bad guy and say, hey, you know why you're mad? Those bums, get them, get them, get them. And then if you say, hey, the problem is structural incentives and we got to fix those, then people are like, oh, where does structural incentives live? Let's get him, and be like, oh, it's not a person. So, but the case that we're making with Forward is that you don't need 51% of us to figure this out to change things. You need probably 5 or 10% of folks to say, you know what, guys, I now am going to put down the tribal weapons and pick up the tribal reform tools. And say, I'm going to support whichever candidate is for solving the incentives. I'm going to support whichever party endorses ranked choice voting in various locations. And if they don't endorse ranked choice voting, then say, why not? And then watch their response, because their response will be deeply unsatisfactory. Trust me. In Nevada, the response was it would be too confusing for voters to have to choose multiple candidates, and they should just have one choice.
And that was the Democrats fighting it in Nevada as opposed to Republicans fighting it in Alaska and Maine.
That was the Democratic
Eventually
Party.
they'll make it real easy. Have one choice, right?
It was like Boss Tweed said, you can do the electing as long as I get to do the nominating. You know what I mean? And so if you get 5 to 10% of Americans energized around the fact it's like, okay, we're being pit against each other, we're being manipulated, our problems are not being solved, I'm going to join this group and try and rationalize the system, we can win. Because how many U.S. senators would it take to change national politics? Probably 2 at this point. You know what I mean? You get 2. And then, so you don't need 51 senators, you just need 2, because it's so polarized and locked up that if you had 2 in the middle, they'd be like, hey guys, we'll actually work with you to solve problems if that's what you want. And then you know what happens? Then the two parties can't just blame each other for everything. It'd be like, well, if you want to get something done, you can just talk to those two because they're ready to go. Now for Congress, it'd be harder and the number would be greater. But this dynamic 100% applies in a host of state legislatures around the country, including Pennsylvania, where Forward Party now has 4 state legislators, which I'm going to suggest is actually the equivalent of 2 U.S. senators. So this stuff is real. We're like grinding away to make it real. We need 5 to 10% of Americans to raise their hands and say, okay, guys, you want this, you want this. Let's reform the system so at least some of us get what we want.
Thank you. And I just one more question.
I'm pro DC statehood for what it's worth. I mean, I grew up on no taxation without representation. Like, what the heck happened? Anyway,
if the media just generally finds this sort of tribalism profitable, and they kind of don't discourage it and kind of feed into it because it helps make them money, how is the best way to kind of counter that if possible?
So the media incentives are in a particular direction. The way I think, it's to build your own giant media conglomerate that then is kind of even Stevener and been like, hey, look, guys, it just actually reports facts and statistics and how people are doing. So I've taken shots at trying to build that, and haven't gotten there yet, but we're still working on it. I have meetings about it all the time. It's like I've got a big plate, but yeah, that's my attitude, because if you go to media organizations and say, hey, be better, do better, waste of time. If you go to a new media organization and be like, let's go get our 5 to 10%, then you might get people very excited and interested.
Thank you.
We've got time for a couple more questions, so everybody in line, please limit yourself to one question.
Good evening. Good evening, Andrew and Stephen. Thank you for your time. My question is, with this being your first fiction novel, what lessons do you hope will resonate with Americans that may not have come across in your nonfiction novels?
So first, it's not his first work of fiction, but you want to give...
Well, I think, we've both written nonfiction books about these problems, right? Like The Next Civil War is about these problems. The War Against Normal People is about these problems. The beauty of the novel, what the novel offers is like you're inside people's perspectives. You see them making decisions and living with choices, right? And that's a good way of showing that there are no good choices, right? Like that the structures are like, because you're rooting for these people. They want to do good. They want to do good things. They just do not have the choices to do it. And the novel is really the home of that reality, where it's like where people exist not in ideal states of ideas or ideologies, but in situations, right? In like situations where they're trying to come to some kind of decision, and they're trying to feel who they are and what they are. So to me, that's why the novel is actually the right way to handle this problem, because it shows that what is happening here, it's not about people, right? It's not about like they're just bad people. It's like the situation they're in makes it impossible for them to do the right thing. That's how I feel.
I'm just trying to get a movie made, man. I'm kidding.
That too.
But I actually want to read this out on you. How many of you are more interested in reading a novel? Let's try that. How many of you are more interested in reading nonfiction? We're more interested in reading because it's a different format, different type of book.
We're in politics and prose, though. I mean,
I've written 3 nonfiction books, and leaned into them pretty hard, and this novel was just to me like another means of reaching different people potentially in different ways, because in my experience some people just prefer a novel to a nonfiction book, and so it's like another way to reach an audience. Yeah.
Most Americans prefer neither.
right. Yeah.
That's why I'm working on the movie.
The movie,
man.
yeah.
I'm
TV
gonna
show.
turn that thing on.
TV show.
Good evening. So you've described this seemingly cut and dried vision of an effective end to the two-party system as we know it, but what would you say are the biggest obstacles to that vision? Bonus points if it's not big tech or the media. Thank
Oh,
you.
it's $200 million, man. I mean, that's a piece of it. Energizing 5 to 10% of Americans in an environment where folks tend to be very tribalized, and there are billion-dollar media companies that do benefit and profit from that tribalism. So there are very significant obstacles. In a way, you have to build a parallel infrastructure to what the two major parties have done, and then do it at the political level, the local level, the donor level, the media level, the influencer level, the intellectual capital level. So if you guys are interested in seeing the intellectual case about the two-party system, there's a guy named Lee Drutman, who's a political scientist based here in D.C., who wrote a book called The Two-Party Doom Loop, nonfiction. And so, what you need is like a whole pillar and constellation, and there are many challenges to that. Now, I think it's very doable. I see the path to be much more realistic than most people imagine, because the appetite is so great. Where you're in a country where 65% of Americans want there to be an alternative to the two-party system. 49% say they're independent. How many of you all think you're independent at this point? Politically homeless, Anyway, so you have massive opportunities, but massive structural obstacles. I will say one of the biggest structural obstacles we face is that there are a lot of folks who are getting their bread buttered by one part or the other, including the entire political consultant class. Like, if you talk to someone who makes political advertisements, literally it's like, I make blue ads, I make red ads. And so if you were an independent candidate at any level, it'd be like, hey, who makes my ads? Maybe no one. And if you approach someone who makes blue ads or red ads, they'll look at you and be like, I cannot make your ads because the team blue or team red is going to be mad at me. And so you could look at the media, you could look at the consultants, you could look at the campaign managers. Like, the entire infrastructure is absent for that figure. So shocker, that figure probably does not win. And then when the next person comes around and tries the same thing, they don't even know anything that the other person experienced. Like, they don't have, one thing you can say about the consultant class is they have been through multiple campaigns, and so they can come and say, hey, like, this is what you do, this is what you do. So every independent then is starting from scratch.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add, if you want to build a new party, you actually have to build the party. If you want a third party, you have to build that, and that takes work over a period of time.
Yeah, so I joke, but it's true. A lot of my jokes are true, unfortunately. That building a national party means building 51 different orgs, because you have to build an org in every state and then the national, and you have to do it from scratch. So we're making great headway a year plus in. We have 35 elected officials, volunteers in all 50 states, leaders in 48 of the 50 states. So if you have friends in North Dakota who want to fix things, anyway, but yeah, forwardparty.com. We are the third biggest party in the country by resources right now. I will say there's a very steep drop off between 2 and 3. But we've got a big up arrow attached, you know what I mean?
Hi, Andrew. My name's Luke. So I was really interested in your commentary on alternative media spaces, because that was actually where I initially discovered you.
Which one, Luke?
Daily Wire. But that was a phase that grew out of that one. But
That's fine, man.
Safe space.
Yeah. So what I was interested in is why do you think there's a sort of apprehension among academia and academics, as well as establishment politicians, to engage in these sort of alternative media spaces where there's large audiences that they could persuade? And do you think there's a drawback to engaging in these sort of alternative platforms in a way of sort of lending them credence?
Oh my gosh, Luke, I love this question so much. All right. So here's one of the issues, is you have corporate media, and 69% of Democrats trust corporate media. Republicans goes down to 15%, so you have very, very different interactions with the media. So then if you are an alternative voice, let's say you create your own YouTube stream, you know what you can't do? You can't just say what corporate media is saying, because they're already saying it, and they have much better production values than you do, and like they make up, and it's like you can't do that. So then what does that leave you? That leaves you with being kind of the oppositional alternative voice to whatever the corporate media is saying. And then you slice that up over 100 different topics. And then if you are a mainstream political figure or an academic, and your choice is to go on that podcast, you're like, oh snap, like I don't know everything this podcaster has said or will say, and their natural incentives in audience building are to be in opposition to the buttoned up corporate media. So maybe I won't. And then you have that play out over and over again for every media pundit and the rest of it. So I've done the alternative. I've also been on CNN and MSNBC and Fox and everything else. And the two universes in some ways kind of exist distinct from each other and in opposition to each other, where you don't see the people across. I guess I'm one of the more unusual figures in that I kind of bounce back and forth.
You are.
But I think that this is someone, Barry Weiss actually, I don't know if I quote Barry, but Barry Weiss quoted me as like, you know what you are, Andrew? You're a rebel corporate. And I was like, I don't know how to feel about that, Barry. And then, so the problem for a lot of these folks is that they see the alternative media as like the rebel platforms, and then they feel like if they go there, then they might not be able to come back.
A major theme of the book is, one of the major characters is a New York Times reporter who then goes on has to leak a story to the alternative press, and about that kind of decision to do that. I mean, the media portion of the book, I would say, is sort of like, belonging to institutions naturally has weaknesses, right? And similarly, as Andrew says, like when you're constantly counter and you're constantly in an algorithmic loop where you're spiraling out, I mean, that's where you end up saying the earth is flat to get the views, right? And that, I mean, that's part of the breakdown, right? Is that the discourse is stuck between these two modes where one is corporate and the other is mad, right? And those are terrible choices. Those are terrible choices. There has to be a better way than that. But I would just say that as a journalist, like that's part of the breakdown that leads to the end of the Republic in this book, anyway.
And I will confess to having an affection for a lot of the alternative podcasters and media folks, and I occasionally see some of them get dragged in various ways, and I'm like, oh man, like it's like I like I'm not sure that's entirely merited, but maybe I tend to be generous with different folks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luke.
All right, so I think we've got time for one more question.
I think it's me. I walked in here. I won't say I stumbled in because I'm sober. I walked in here today. My father would have turned 100 years old today on 9/11. So it's miraculous that you're here, because the only party that I thought had a snowball's chance in hell of doing anything different was yours. Here's my question. What's the greatest single pain, physical, or emotional, that you've ever experienced, sir?
When my first son was born, he was autistic and we did not know it. And it was a real struggle for my wife and me. And I was, I was kind of the stereotypical dad where my wife would say like, hey, I think there's something amiss. And I was like, it's fine. I was on the road a lot. I was an entrepreneur at the time, still am, I suppose. And the breakdown in my relationship with my wife, we're still together, but it felt like my soul was being stretched in various ways. And then I later found out that
Easy, man. You're good. You made it.
that she was being sexually assaulted by her doctor, and I was on the road at the time.
That's a two-parter. That's a lot of pain.
Yeah, I just felt like such a failure.
But you didn't fail because you're here.
Well, I didn't fail because my wife's still.
You didn't
I know.
fail. So you survived that pain. And it's what makes you a potentially phenomenal president. Because the other two parties are hot garbage. There is no doubt in my mind, nor has there been any doubt in my mind, if you want to be president, that you will be president. But until people are in on your suffering. You're just an entertainer, like the rest of them. You got a great sense of humor, you're smart as shit, but you're just another entertainer. And until you get in touch with that pain and know that there's nobody in this fucking room that's in serious pain, because they wouldn't be here if they were. But if in Ward 6, 7, 8, city of Baltimore, you don't have to go very far to see pain everywhere. Baltimore's a shit show. You can buy a rat's nest, not a house, not a formerly abandoned house, a rat's nest for $5,000. That's Baltimore. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thank you to Andrew and Stephen for talking tonight. Great audience, great questions. And they will be signing books. Where, Alan?
The signing line will start right here behind me.
Okay.
Remember to fold up your chairs. The books are available back at the registers. Let's give Andrew and Stephen another round of applause.